Okay, welcome everybody to an informational session. And today is Tuesday, February 26, 2019. We're here with the Town Board and Planning Board. Welcome. And Planning Board doesn't have a meeting tonight. And are they here?
Nope.
And the Architecture Review Board is here as well. Thank you. There's not enough seats up here. That's the problem.
Can make room.
Zoning board.
The Zoning Board is here as well. And we should designate like somebody, you know, like I do at the State of the Union. God forbid something happens. All of us in this room, the whole town will go up in smoke. So,
Not a tear will be shed.
okay, I got a good idea. We're going to designate John Ehrlich. John, you have to leave.
No, we insist, John. We're serious about this.
You're the designee. All right, so now we have Nicholas Ward-Willis here, our town attorney. He's going to do our presentation on the Con Ed moratorium. Welcome, Nick. You're always here.
Thank you. I thought this was public comment time. No? I have a few comments now. I'm on this side of the aisle.
For years.
So thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. Keenan Bean has done a number of presentations about the Con Ed moratorium because we recognize both for our municipal clients and our land use clients, this was a pretty important issue that we didn't think was getting the right attention. Con Ed announced on a Friday morning at 11 a.m., hey, by the way, we're going to stop accepting new natural gas connections as of March 15th, and you got 2 months to get applications in. We thought it was pretty significant. We didn't think it was getting their play. We didn't think everyone had thought through the implications, so we put together a presentation that we did to our private clients as well as to our municipal clients, and we had building inspectors. We made comments to the Public Service Commission. And so what I hope to do tonight is give you a slimmed down version of that, but go over all the issues. And what I want to do is start explaining first, what is the moratorium, what's the need for it, why are we here, and make sure people understand that this is the new reality. When we think of a moratorium, we think of a municipality adopting a moratorium for land use code while you preserve the status quo. You have to go through a public hearing, you have to provide for hardship relief. Con Edison's natural gas moratorium doesn't have to and didn't comply with any of that. They weren't required to. No regulations by the PSC. That's, in fact, one of the comments I made to the PSC, that public utilities should be required to hold a public hearing and put the public on notice that there's going to be a moratorium. And so tonight we're going to touch through some of these issues. A lot of ground to cover. Certainly if you have questions, try and interrupt me. So what I hope to accomplish is sort of explain how did we get here, where are we, and where are we going. As I've said repeatedly, the lack of getting new natural gas connections is the new reality. It's the new norm. They call it a moratorium. I think we're not going to see that ability out there. There are some exceptions that will apply, but we need to accept the new reality for a number of reasons is here. So what is the problem? And these are some quotes from Con Edison that I think are worth reading. The demand for natural gas in our service area has been experiencing significant growth primarily due to the construction of new buildings, the opening of new businesses, and conversions from oil to cleaner burning natural gas in existing buildings. But all of this new demand for gas is reaching the limits of the current supplies to our service area. So it's not that there's not enough natural gas in the country or being able to get to New York State. There are transmission lines. It's not that Con Edison doesn't have the infrastructure to distribute that natural gas to its customer. The problem is that there's not enough pipelines to deliver the natural gas into Westchester County. But trying to get 8 pounds of potatoes into a 5-pound bag, there's just not enough. Need that extra lane on the highway. So that's why there is the problem, the need for a moratorium. The demand has increased. The supply is out there. It's just not able to get it into the service area. So the second bullet point is that as a result of this increased demand and the lack of getting the supply to the service area, so as a result, and to maintain reliable service to our existing natural gas customers on the coldest days, we will no longer be accepting applications for natural gas connections from new customers in most of our Westchester County service area beginning March 15th, so in less than a month. And there are some areas in the northern sections where there will be, and existing customers are not affected by the moratorium. That's not quite true. It does apply to existing customers. Simple example is if you want to add a big expansion to your house and you're increasing the natural gas demand, moratorium applies to you. So we're going to get into some more details. But Con Edison, in their announcement on a Friday at 11 a.m., best time to drop bad news, because who's going to read about it in the Saturday newspaper, is it was a little bit downplayed. There are significant consequences. A lot of what I'm saying sounds terrible, and that part of it is because it is, but there's also some solutions out there, so I'm going to give you some thoughts as to how we get through this issue. So let's understand what's the cause of the increased demand. Why is there a growth in natural gas uses? Part of it's due to climate change and trying to reduce pollution, reduce our demand on reliance on fossil fuels. So abandonment of fuel oil tanks. Fuel oil tanks have environmental issues. They leak, as some of you may unfortunately know. It's a costly cleanup, and it harms the environment. So in New York City, 6,500 large buildings converted from fuel oil tanks to natural gas. Clearly, tens of thousands of new customers, new uses, new demands wanting natural gas, and that's just in New York City. It's occurred in Westchester. We've had a number of clients who have just converted, got rid of their oil tanks and hooked up to natural gas. In Westchester County, it was more severe because in June of 2016, Westchester County banned number 6 fuel oil for good environmental reasons. Number 6 oil burns heavier, reduces more particulates into the air, and isn't as good for the environment. So as of July of last year, you could no longer burn number 6 fuel oil. Instead of converting burners, people got rid of number 6 fuel oil tanks and got rid of fuel oil tanks. Some converted to number 4 fuel oil tanks, which is a less thicker type of fuel oil. But that's going to be banned after July 31st, 2020. And then you have to use number 2 fuel oil. Number 2 fuel oil has environmental issues because number 6 is like tar, so it doesn't move if the tank leaks, doesn't really move. Number 2 fuel oil has more viscosity, so it will move through the environment, so it has more environmental issues, so people aren't too fond of it. So they've gotten off of oil tanks. Gas load on peak winter days, Con Ed says, has increased by more than 30% since 2011 in 8 years. Expecting another 23% increase over the next 20 years in the gas load on the peak winter day. And that's people getting off of oil, getting off of other sources, and going on to natural gas.
Question, and the 23% increase they're predicting an increase even though they're going to cut off new gas supplies. So where's that increase going to come from?
We're holding questions until the end. No, just that one.
No, I'm sorry.
No.
You only meant easy questions.
Yes.
I got it. Okay.
Well, questions I had prearranged answers to. So
I didn't get one of those.
So no, that's correct. The 23% is the anticipated growth before the moratorium was imposed, and that is one of the needs for the moratorium, because Con Ed, as a regulated public utility, has to be truthful, and if they can't say we're going to be able to meet demands, they can't tell customers we're going to be able to supply you. So they've taken the position that we know we're not going to be able to meet the 23% growth, let's stop it now and let people know. There is, giving a little bit of a preview of what we're going to speak about, there's another community that has gone through this, through a moratorium, so we have some lessons from there that we can apply to outside Ithaca. Reason number 4, increased natural gas use at odds with New York State's climate change goal. So the governor has his goal of making sure the state is off of fossil fuels and 50% of its electricity is coming from renewable energy by 2030 in 11 years. By 2040, it wants it to be 100%. So where are we now? We're at 28%. So in the next 11 years, we've got to come up with 12 extra percent of where we're going to be getting clean energy from. And nuclear is presently 33%. But Indian Point's closing will take off an 11% of that clean energy right now. So currently, as you see from 2017, gas supply is 37%, nuclear 33%, hydroelectric 23%, wind 4%, and solar 1%. So natural gas is a big source, but there's a requirement to get off of fossil fuels. Number 5, new construction. Southern Westchester, over 16,000 new construction, new residential units expected. White Plains is 6,000 new residential units expected. And elsewhere, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, Yonkers, it's the rebirth of the cities. People are recognizing it's good to be in close to train stations, close to the commute, so it's resulted in a building construction boom. Customers looking for cost savings and environmental benefits. We've touched on that a little bit with gas versus oil. Excuse me, I'm fighting a little bit of a cold. So what was the response to the demand? One, the utilities have been seeking approval from the Public Service Commission to build new pipelines. Efforts to approve new pipelines have not been successful. In part, it's due to a shift to clean renewable energy. The quote here is helpful. The commission encourages the development of smart alternatives rather than the antiquated approach of simply building even more pipelines, they said in an August 9th statement. The problem is that if you're building more pipelines, that's directly at odds with the governor's goal of reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And the Public Service Commission has noted that if they allow new pipelines, which actually is through FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who would approve it, but if there are new pipelines, it's going to take 40, 50 years for that investment to be earned back. So if you allow a new pipeline, you're then just encouraging continued reliance on fossil fuels. So the Public Service Commission is encouraging meet this new demand by building non-pipeline solutions. So in the fall of 2018, Con Ed sought approval from the Public Service Commission for some non-pipeline solutions. Let's get energy to the communities, but not through natural gas pipelines. They saw this day coming. They called it the Smart Solutions Program. I'll let history judge whether that's a good title or not. And the PSC approved it on February 7th. A couple of points. Number one, Con Ed will build as many as 5 compressed and liquefied natural gas storage sites in Westchester County. So what does that mean? Here's one example. We're going to build a 70,000-gallon storage tank in some lucky community in Westchester County where we'll be trucking in liquefied natural gas and use it as a storage, and then on the peak demand. The natural gas issue isn't really an issue during the summer. It's really that peak winter demand. That's the time that Con Ed is concerned, and that's what they have to meet. So one solution is to build these 5 off-site storage locations where you can then just inject that stored natural gas into the energy supply system to meet the demands. I'd be curious to see how this goes. Certainly, the lucky community in Westchester County is going to be concerned about the aesthetic impacts, but there's a need for it to be built to meet their demands. The PSC has approved this. Number 2, convert up to 3 facilities that convert organic waste into locally sourced renewable natural gas. So instead of having a 70,000-gallon tank, you would have a large compost pile taking organic waste and putting that into making renewable gas energy. Environmental communities don't necessarily think that's a good source because methane can be just as harmful to the environment if you're using that as your source of renewable energy. And again, some community in Westchester, or 3, are going to be the recipients of these facilities. And there will, of course, be trucks bringing the materials. So there's a question as to what's the environmental impact from the trucks bringing the natural gas to the gas storage sites, bringing the materials to the renewable energy source. But again, these have been approved. The third item, Con Ed was approved by the PSC to provide electric space heating in select neighborhoods, ground source heat pumps in up to 8,800 single-family homes at Con Edison's cost, installation of air source heat pumps up to 1,000 small units, and then incentives to install heat pumps in an additional 1,000. We're really trying to take it away from the single-family homes and relieve natural gas for multifamily buildings, because the heat pumps are certainly more preferable for single families than it is for larger construction. So the response to demand, this is just a slide that shows you the money. I think it was $305 million that the Public Service Commission approved for you, the ratepayers, to pay back. So the demand side of it is the demand response. Energy efficiency, the heat pumps, $148 million. And a couple of other programs up there. Then on the supply side, right? So they're not just coming up with alternative sources like heat pumps, they're still bringing natural gas in, and that's another $83 million.
I'm sorry, Nick, can you go back to that for just a second?
Of course, yep.
Can you just slow down for a moment and walk us through
I can
this?
try.
Sorry, I told him to speak quickly. I take it.
Apologize.
I didn't think he'd take me that literally.
Nice cut.
Right, so on the demand side, Con Ed will be spending $222 million, approved by the PSC, to come up with how are they responding to the demand and providing alternative energy for sources other than natural gas. And this is their NPS, non-pipeline solutions. So we're going to spend $145 million on energy efficiency, $148 million, need new context. Of that, $75 million on heat pumps, for a total of $222 million to be spent to come up with non-natural gas solutions to provide energy to the community. And then the second half of it is $83 million for supplying it, bringing in the renewable natural gas, the organic plants, and then the liquid naturalified gas. So that's what Con Ed will be doing to meet the new demand.
So, I'm sorry. Is it,
The titles are confusing.
yeah, sorry, they talk about other electrification?
Well, other electrification is zero.
Okay.
There's no
all right.
money spent, nor of the
Okay,
demand
sorry,
side.
that's what I was, okay.
And the pipelines, right now, they carry what kind of gas? Methane?
Just the natural gas,
Methane.
before methane, yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Or methane, probably some propane. All right.
So, whoops, wrong one. So notwithstanding the smart solutions, Con Ed also stated in September 28 in a filing last year with the PSC, and which was confirmed at not last week's, the February 7th session, quote, "These measures do not eliminate the need for a new natural gas pipeline to keep up with our region's energy needs." Remember, $305 million, an application they made in September, which was approved in February. They said that these measures don't eliminate the need. A pipeline is needed to meet the demand for natural gas, considering issuing an additional marketplace solicitation for other solutions. And here's the last one that was on page 11 in a paragraph and only mentioned once or twice. A temporary moratorium on new natural gas customer remains a possibility. So they said that in their September 28, 2018 filing. So $305 million, money well spent. So in the PSC press release, when they approved the Con Ed's $305 million proposal, they stated $223 million available to fund energy efficiency, and that 223 was the demand side, the heat pumps that we spoke about. Available to fund energy efficiency and electrification to lower natural gas demand and replace dirty fossil fuels. We never would have thought natural gas is a dirty fossil fuel. It is by a typical environmental definition, but natural gas was always considered to be the cleaner fuel, the better fuel.
Cleanest
Yes.
of all the.
Right, better than coal, better, right. And here the PSC has said it's a dirty fossil fuel. Again, in line with the state's climate policy of recognizing that climate change is here. We need to deal with it. We need to address it. It's got to be dealt with now. And fossil fuels dependency is not the way of the future. So we're getting a signal, and that's why I keep saying, call it a moratorium. I think you guys call it the new reality, the new norm. So Con Edison responded to a question from the PSC that even if all the smart solutions come to fruition, it is unlikely that Con Edison would be able to lift the moratorium. So that was said in February when there was a hearing before the PSC.
Capitalize it, or did Con Ed capitalize it?
I don't know if they were yelling it at the time.
Okay.
So, again, we talk about climate change. This is a headline I saw last week in the BBC News. So in Britain, their environmental subcommittee has proposed to ban natural gas for new homes in 6 years. So the United States is not alone. It's recognized natural gas, climate change. We've got to start taking this issue seriously and coming up with solutions. So, should we have known? Did Con Ed publicize this dire situation? I don't think so. I'm a officer of the State Bar Environmental and Energy Law section. We talk about energy. We weren't talking about a natural gas moratorium. Our land use clients weren't talking about it. Our municipal clients weren't talking about it. Con Ed did apparently mention it a little bit in fall of 2017. They had it in their 2018 filing with the PSC, but I don't think anyone was focused on it. The PSC certainly wasn't focused on it, in my opinion, because the moratorium was announced, caught them unprepared, and then they announced they would hold public hearings so they could get better prepared for the next one. So, any guess on who was focused on the issue? The New York Post. That's where I go to get all my energy news. So in October, just after the September 28, 2018 filing, New York Post had an editorial. Thanks to Cuomo, Con Ed may have to stop taking new customers. Now, the Post never misses an opportunity to swipe at the governor, but they had a point. They at least recognized the implications of this, and their editorial talks about what the implications would be. But again, none of the other mainstream media or people really focused on it. So again, you have January, and the moratorium gets implemented. January 17th it was announced. New York Post saw an opportunity and came up with blame Cuomo for New York's coming natural gas crisis. And again, I think if people have been following the energy sectors, it really wasn't much of a surprise. We should have expected. I think Con Ed should have done a much better job of preparing us for it. But in my view, it doesn't really matter. It's here. It's got to be dealt with. It's a new reality. So on January 18th, Con Ed made a statement, and Greg, I want to note, I did add emphasis added at the end of that one. So as a result, and to maintain reliable service to our existing natural gas customers on the coldest days, we will no longer be accepting applications for natural gas connections from new customers in most of our Westchester County service area beginning March 15th. There are some areas in the northernmost sections of the county where we will have more capacity and may still be able to accept new customers. Existing customers are not affected by the moratorium. Wrong on 2 accounts. Existing customers are affected, may still be able to accept new customers in the northern areas. That they may be able to do so. We'll see over time what happens there.
Does that, when you say existing customers are not affected, does that include cost rise? The rise in gas?
I mean the $205 million?
Well, not that too, but
Right.
the cost of gas will go up. It's
Yes.
simple.
Yep, sure. So here's a map on Con Ed. It does have a web page on the natural gas moratorium. If you Google Con Ed natural gas moratorium, you'll find it. The area in blue are the areas affected by the moratorium. The areas in yellow are those that are not. I've got a list of the areas that are not. So Buchanan, Croton, Cortland, Lewisboro, North Salem, Peekskill, Pound Ridge, Somers, and Yorktown are not affected. There's enough supply getting there. I don't understand their distribution system, but those communities are not impacted by this moratorium. They can continue building. They can continue to rely on natural gas, so they're not impacted. But remember, Con Ed's statement may still be able to accept new customers. Doesn't mean we should expect that to remain. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. And, yeah,
Aren't a lot of those customers not serviced by Con Ed?
they're NYSEG, yes.
Yes.
Some of them are nice. Well, so it's NYSEG is electricity. I live in Somers, and we get Con Ed natural gas.
Yeah.
But
So-
you get NYSEG Electric.
A NYSEG electric, Con Ed natural gas. So I think that's still Con Ed natural gas service. And so we now have this moratorium, and the reason I think it needs to be spoken about is that, 2 examples. We had a client who said, well, and notwithstanding, we had sent this to them and sent them the map, said, well, I'm still waiting to see what this all really means and if it really means all areas of southern Westchester. Con Ed's pretty clear. It means what it means. They're a regulated utility. They can't say, I'll do it for you, but not someone else who's next door. Everyone's got to be treated the same. On a Friday, the week the moratorium was announced, there was a real estate broker who told me he had just finalized a deal for 70,000 square feet of new residential development in White Plains, just off of North Broadway. Moratorium got announced on Saturday. They were supposed to sign the contract on Monday. The developer backed out of the deal and wouldn't proceed with it, clearly because of this moratorium. All the deals had been finalized that were supposed to meet. They did not. So it is real, it has an impact,
What does that mean for North 60?
and there are solutions. So, here we are. Applicability, so what does the moratorium applies to? New residential, commercial, and industrial customer gas service connections. Really everyone, all new connections.
Yeah.
Incremental gas loads on existing residential and commercial and industrial gas accounts unless it meets one of the exceptions. So vacant land, you want to put a new house up, you would be subject to the moratorium. There are 1 or 2 exceptions we'll get to. If you don't previously have, it's an existing commercial space, if it's a nail salon, you want to put a restaurant in, you get natural gas connection, you're subject to the moratorium. Incremental gas load, you have a 2-bedroom house, you want to add on a 3-bedroom addition, you're subject to the moratorium. And then again, new gas usage for heating, hot water, laundry, and cooking. So anything that requires Con Ed to come out there and make a new gas connection. Exceptions. The first, yes.
Did you say what the exceptions were?
We got, next slide.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No,
He got the memo.
Following you.
I like your questions better than sticks are tougher.
I know what the slides are.
Yeah.
You know what the slides are, you have the answers, and you want the questions that you, yeah, okay, got it, thank you.
So the first one is the one that I think most people will go to, interruptible service. Interruptible service is where you agree, sign a contract with Con Edison, they'll supply you with the natural gas, but at some point, typically during the peak winter demand, they call you up and say, stop, turn off the natural gas and switch to your other source, typically an oil tank. Typical in a lot of commercial high-rise, commercial buildings that represent co-ops, and they have interruptible service. So they'll have natural gas, but when a cold day Con Ed calls them up, they'll switch to their oil tank that they have, hopefully above ground in their basement. And so that's interruptible service. You could do that in a single-family home if you wanted to. Have a 250-gallon tank in your garage and be ready on that cold day when you get the call to switch over. interruptible service. If you call and you don't do it, they won't kick you off the first time. They'll kick you off the second time. Penalty. You will be charged 9 times the cost of that day market rate supply. If you go on the interruptible service, they give you, I believe, a lower rate. They'll charge you the highest market rate available 9 times. And on the second time you do it, they'll charge you, and then they'll kick you off the program, and you can no longer be part of the interruptible service. So, and I've told they do it, they've done it in the past, and they have to because they can't have you on there when you're supposed to be off, because then you're going to cause them not to be able to supply the natural gas to other customers. So interruptible service is an exception. It's out there. I think it's probably what multifamily buildings, right? If you're building a multifamily building in Yonkers or Mount Vernon and you can't get natural gas, are you going to use heat pumps? I don't think that's practical. Can you put a solar panel to get all your energy? Probably not. So interruptible service with, unfortunately, an oil tank would likely be your best solution. And oil tanks are good, they're reliable, oil can be cheap, but you just got to be careful of the environmental issues that come from either faulty installation or bad maintenance.
Well, it also runs counter to the governor's mandate.
It does, yes.
Why couldn't you have, maybe this is a silly question, why couldn't you have a tank of natural gas that's supplied by a truck?
Outside.
Or propane.
Propane, you could have propane, yep. But I think you're gonna, but it's gonna be more expensive also. I think the storage capacity would have to be larger also.
You got fire code issues though, and zoning codes and all that stuff too.
Right, yep, yep. But you can get another alternative energy source. Maybe it's a solar power, maybe it's wind power.
Heat pumps.
Heat pumps, yep.
Heat pumps, if you have the right territory, the right kind of terrain, heat pumps are very cost effective.
Well, some heat pumps though can't be operated in cold weather conditions though, right?
Oh, no, they
No?
can.
Okay.
They can. You just have to make sure you're below the
Frost line,
zone,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. Other exceptions, natural gas fueled emergency generator. So if you need a generator, you can go ahead and apply for that. It's not subject to the moratorium. That was one of the initial concerns we had. Con Ed justified it by saying that you don't need your, most times the generator gets used is during the summer months when there's no peak demand.
What?
Yeah, I know, right? Hurricane Sandy was in the summer months. Winter, trees never fall down on power lines.
But Nick, would residents still need to apply for this? So if they're installing a generator, they would still need to file an application?
They still need to file an application with the town, they still need to file an application with Con Edison. Thank you for the clarification. You're exempt from a moratorium, you're not exempt from getting plumbers and licenses and permits.
And that application needs to be filed by March 15th.
No, not for, no.
That was my
Except
question.
for
That was my question.
No, so you can file for a natural gas-fired emergency generator July 15th, and you're fine. You are exempt from a moratorium. So if someone moves into town to March 16th, they can still put a generator in.
But you still need to file with Con Ed
Yes.
for the exemption for the use of the natural gas to fuel.
You don't need to,
your-
well, you don't need to file for the exemption, but when you file for the natural gas hookup, they'll recognize that you're exempt because it's a natural gas generator. This one I don't quite understand if it's an exception. They call small business customers in the food beverage industry may email Con Ed to find out if gas is available prior to signing a lease. I've asked for clarification on that. They said no new services will be installed, but they may be able to use an existing service for cooking.
How's that an exception?
Yeah. Here's where I think it's an exception. If a tenant goes out of business and ceases using the natural gas, Con Ed has told me you have 2 years to reconnect that use. So if my restaurant goes out of business and the landlord can't re-rent it for a year and a half, that new tenant can come in and still hook up to natural gas.
Which is different from the nail salon that becomes a restaurant.
Yes. The key is that Con Ed says when that tenant goes out of business, make sure you call Con Ed, put it in writing, and get a note placed in the file so they know that you were previously a natural gas customer and it was being used for a restaurant, because they're going to be looking to know what was the demand. So if they only have 1 bay of a storefront and they come in and the new restaurant occupies 3 bays, you're likely not going to be able to get that connection, because it has to be equal to what the prior demand was.
Well, couldn't the landlord keep the connection going? Even though the store is vacant, the landlord could keep the connection going, just
Yes.
to sort of toll the,
He can keep the connection, but then he'd have to at least have a bill with an active account.
right, so you have like a little space.
Yeah, right, I just have a space or something, but yes, that would be
You can
another
still
one.
rent it to a restaurant.
Yes,
Right, without the 2-year worry.
correct, yes.
He needs to know that this is in place, otherwise he wouldn't know to do that, so.
Right.
Yep. So, what we're telling people is make sure that your landlords and your tenants are aware of these issues.
Would you have to use a certain amount, or as long as you're operating, you're okay?
I think as long as you're operating okay and you're not adding any new demand. So as long as you're an existing customer, it's probably no different than if I leave to go to Florida for the winter, if you will, and I'm not using as much heat as I typically would. That's how I would make it again. And Con Ed has said, right, as long as it's not a new connection, so you're still a customer, you're fine. Most tenants go out if the tenant has the connection, so the account gets shut down. Customers with planned renovations already have natural gas. You can reconnect your gas, provided there's no net increase in gas load. So a tear down. If I tear down a 1,500 square foot house and I put up a 1,500 square foot house, as long as it gets done within 2 years, I'm good. If I tear down 1,500 square feet house and I put up a 4,000 square foot house, I've got a problem unless I can meet my demand what it was previously. So if I'm adding more demand, Con Ed's gonna say, no, you can't do it.
So the house is more energy efficient, you're gonna use about the same electricity, you might have a bigger house. But
You'd be okay, that's right. The key there is making sure that you have a design professional beforehand substantiate what your energy demand was. Before you tear the house down, absolutely, point out that it's poorly efficient, you had old appliances, and my demand is high, and then come in and show that it's what the new demand is and that it's lower. Absolutely right. A 4,000 square foot house may be more efficient than a 1,500 square foot house that's
So
40 years old.
just to clarify then, if I, using the 1,500 square foot house example, if I wanted to either do an addition or build a 2,000 square foot house, and it's obviously not this simple, but have another 500 square feet, could you theoretically keep the gas for the 1,500 square foot usage and then electric heat for the other 500 square feet?
Yes, as long as you're not increasing the demand. I also question how Con Ed would know if, if every new connection requires it, if you're still using that same energy plant. I don't know that Con Ed would know that you're putting new demand on it. But you're right, you could put solar panels that take away some of that energy use. Maybe it's an electric cooktop, but you keep your heating as natural gas. Right, and there wouldn't be a change in the demand. The key is, according to Con Ed, the key is to make sure you're not showing an increase in your demand. The last one is just, I call it an exception, Northern Westchester. Just make sure that you know you're there, but that's until they say otherwise.
Nick, sorry,
Mhm.
you mentioned 2 years, well, talking about the residential.
Yeah.
So a house goes vacant, they stop this gas service. If it takes beyond 2 years to reconnect a new person, do they lose the connection completely? Is that?
It's a good question. I will ask Con Edison. My belief is that I don't want to say my belief is yes. I'll ask Con Edison, but from what I've been told, they told me it was a 2-year time period to reconnect. Using that logic, it would appear the answer would be they would lose that connection, but it's worth clarifying.
Right.
I'll do that. It's a good question.
And could you get an extension, a procedure for an extension?
Right. Well, I'm hoping that's one of the things the PSC will do. The PSC should now come up with regulations that we're not just relying on Con Edison and arbitrary. The PSC should say, when there's a natural gas moratorium, here are some exceptions that a utility needs to have. So that way the regulated public knows. I mean, think about lenders. Everyone wants certainty. Certainty is what helps projects go forward and lending and banks to do financing. And we don't have that certainty right now. So how long will the moratorium last? I think I've answered that. It remains in effect until sufficient supply is available to meet new demand. Unlikely we're going to get new gas supply pipes coming in here. And so I don't see additional pipelines, so they have to come up with non-pipeline alternatives. And Con Ed's website says, we encourage you to explore long-term alternatives to natural gas for your heating, hot water, laundry, and cooking needs. Again, it's not a moratorium in my mind. That's not what I think most of us would expect when we call the moratorium.
The liquid gas, the storage tanks, number one, does a municipality have the ability, Con Ed, we want to build it in Newcastle, Yonkers, doesn't matter where, White Plains. What's the municipality's ability to challenge that from happening in their municipality? And number two, what is the size of, how do we visualize?
A 70,000 gallon tank?
What is that?
I don't know, Dick, do you have thoughts on how,
So with the Elmhurst gas tanks down
Pardon
in
me?
Queens?
how big is a 70,000 gallon tank?
Of gas?
Yeah.
No, I'm asking.
70,000 gallon tank?
Yep, storage tanks, it's above ground storage tanks, they have 30 feet high and,
I would,
Picture the airport.
right, that's what
See
I'm
those tanks
thinking of,
in the
those
Yeah.
large industrial tanks that you would see.
they're very large, and they
New
have to
Jersey.
be very carefully built. They have to have all sorts of safety precautions. Usually, there's a blast zone that is around.
I like how you backed up when you did that.
You want me to go on? It gets better.
So then it begs the question, so if Con Edison has to or will be installing these, where do they go and what's the ability?
Right,
of
so
the
Con Ed will have to
municipality?
get, they'll have to comply with SECRA, and I don't believe they're exempt as a public utility from getting land use approvals. So,
I understand
Yeah.
that, but they're going to choose on their own
yes,
criteria. We want to be in this location for accessibility, that location, whatever their determination is. And then as a municipality, we have the right, just like any other matter, to go through secret.
I'm going to confirm that they don't have any special exemptions as a public utility, but I'll confirm that. That
Can
they're
they be
subject to
lead
land use
agency?
approvals. No, they could not be lead agents.
That's good.
You would have to pay rents.
Well, or buy the land,
Taxpayer
or,
would have
And
yeah.
I'm not saying we want it, but I'm just- maybe some municipality would welcome it, who knows?
Well, what's interesting is you're going to get me, the environmentalists are going to come out and say you shouldn't approve this because it's just encouraging fossil fuel reliance.
Same thing.
Right. So,
Just a different form and more inefficient form.
Right.
exactly right. But I think
That's neither here nor there if they're coming in. The
Right.
question is,
Oh,
what do
yeah.
we do if,
Not to mention,
Right.
the transportation is the real issue. We've lost two overpasses on 87 in
Yeah.
the last 25 years that I can remember. I think they were both LPG.
Yep. And so we're called traveling time bombs, I think is what Upstate Community refers to
Remember,
them as.
87 was closed for
Right.
like 2 months when they rebuilt that thing.
Yeah,
You
so,
tend to want those near a port, so you can buy cheap gas from Russia.
gotcha.
It's really, no, it's really where the reality is.
So remember, it's part of a program called Smart Solutions.
Yeah.
So, a couple of key slides here is how to contact Con Edison if you have questions. Con Ed's website, I found them to be informative. I've always called back twice, so I make sure I get the same answer twice. I recommend you do that. Get it in writing as well.
2 out of 3.
So that's the phone number, that's the email, and that's the dedicated webpage. Important dates, that's passed, they held a public hearing. March 15th is the last day to file applications. Here's the key point, unless it becomes necessary to stop accepting new requests before the enrollment period. So we say March 15th, the Ides of March, but it might be sooner than that. And they said their applications have more than doubled for the same time period. So if you're really thinking about this, do it now, don't wait, you don't want to be cut off. On the moratorium hearing itself, you can go to the PSC, there's a statement, they have information on their website. This slide has the case number 17G0606. You can submit comments either through telephone, through email, or in writing, and talk about the moratorium and the concerns. So, natural gas moratoriums,
But
somewhat,
those comments have to be in in 2 more days.
Yeah,
February 28th.
yeah.
Yes.
We're gonna draft comments. We're gonna send comments from the town, right? We're all in agreement?
Yes.
yes.
Good idea.
So, Massachusetts and Rhode Island have had gas moratoriums, but those were due to safety issues. You may recall about 2 years ago, there was an overpressurization, and in a suburb outside Boston, it blew up. The energy provider there did a
how do you choose that
moratorium.
order, by the way?
You gotta wait, shh, don't steal my thunder, don't steal my
I
thunder.
just thought, is there an order? Alphabetical?
California was going to do one because of the supply issue, not the restriction of supply, but the lack of supply. It never amounted to anything, so they did not impose one. For those of you like Jeremy who are natural gas energy quiz aficionados, Islamabad is an answer to who else has had a natural gas moratorium. They had one for commercial industrial connections for, any remember how many long? 7 years.
Wow.
7-year
There was
moratorium.
really moratorium as opposed to
Yes,
game.
yes, yes, so you can now set up in Islamabad and you can get natural gas.
Right, whereas.
So, town of Lansing, New York, outside Ithaca, natural gas moratorium since 2017 with some impacts that I'm going to go through in a moment. National Grid in Long Island is warning of a supply squeeze if their new pipeline called the Supply Enhancement Project is not approved. So this is the new norm, I've said that before, this is the new reality. You're going to see natural gas restrictions, not just in Westchester, but certainly in Long Island, and I'm not saying New York City, but I think some would say New York City in a couple of years.
I have a question. Is this same problem plaguing upstate New York?
Just in the town of Lansing, but no, not in upstate.
Lansing is like,
Yes.
in my coffee cup.
7,000 people.
Does anybody know how many houses in the town, or what area of the town is serviced by natural gas? Like half the town, 25% of the town, 90%?
Newcastle?
Yeah, Newcastle. Our town.
It's less than
Our
half.
development department actually has.
You had a guess?
I was gonna say, we have some old infrastructure as to where the gas lines are, but
But we know in the past, the town, for example, has, when they've done sidewalk work or infrastructure work, The town has worked with Con Edison to extend the natural gas pipeline further from where it is so that new neighborhoods are served from
I'm
it.
just trying to wonder, what areas
Yeah.
get impact for development? Like, so somebody wanted to come in and do something in a part of the town that may not even have natural gas there anyway, so this may not, completely stop everything from going on.
Maybe
Well,
just the
the-
hamlets,
What
right?
about the Legionnaires on the east side of town?
No.
That's
Well,
not,
the downtown, though, is.
Yeah,
Downtown
gas.
downtown
And
is
if
gonna
We're
be-
doing the
gas?
zoning RFP, and if we want to encourage landlords to go up 2 or 3 stories, they're going to have an issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
without a
That's
doubt,
true.
because you can't get oil up there.
But
Is
we're
the
not-
Millwood Hamlet supplied by gas?
I don't know.
Greg,
They're
why
not
couldn't
supplied by
you have oil?
a lot of things. I would
Chapel
think.
It's a
Crossing
pump-
is
you have a
supplied.
furnace up top.
So
you know,
what do you do in the
Crossing's
alternative
got
then?
it.
What's the alternative if you
Got a
can't
lot
get the
of
gas?
It's just not good to pump oil up into a building, that's all.
Electric heat pumps, electric units. So we're actually,
Cost
yes,
is going to be borne upon the tenant or just to be that much more expensive?
yes, yeah.
Is electric heat pump the same thing as geothermal? Is it different?
Different. And geothermal is certainly an option as well, which is encouraged. So we're actually working with some representatives from NYSERDA, and we're going to work on with Con Edison as well to come up with what are the solutions. We know what the problem is, what are some solutions? So there is a phase 2 to this if the board is interested in us coming back and sort of providing more information. We're probably going to rep from NYSERDA to come here and talk about the financial benefits and the rebates as well. So how is my project affected? How are we doing on time? We're
You're so far over, don't worry.
Well, I've been with the town long enough, I know that's the norm.
No moratorium yet.
Tough crowd. So,
If we don't want to learn more, you won't come back?
so how is my project affected? This is sort of some examples we've come up with. So before and after March 15th, the emergency generators, we know, it's still, you can still apply for and get hooked up. Additions to structures, we know the answer is if you don't increase the demand, after March 15th, you can still use new natural gas. New structure after March 15th, you're not going to be able to use natural gas. New structure, phase construction, there was a question about a phased development, a condominium development, you do 100 condominiums. What if you don't get all 100 built by 2 years? Con Ed has said, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Oh, let me get to it. So, where do you file? Go to Con Ed's Building and Remodeling Project Center, and you go to their website, you start a new project, you get a project number. It's not something the average resident can do because the key question is, what's your energy demand? So your architect, your professional engineer, your MEPC engineer will be able to tell you what is your energy demand, and that's necessary to file the information with Con Edison. And they kind of did say they would likely ferret out the speculative applications who aren't real or aren't realistic and require people to put up fees and pay money up front to secure it. What do you need to file? All you need to know is your energy demand. Your project could just be a thought in the back of your mind. You don't need to have land use approvals. You don't need a building permit. You don't need a contractor. You don't need a signed agreement. You don't need signed plans. You just need to know what your energy demand is. So if you're thinking of putting an addition, and you know you want to get natural gas, talk to your design professional, file an application before March 15th or sooner, and to do so. So I think that's an important point. It's very simple. Just if you think you might expand your house, go ahead and get that application in. And you have 2 years to do it for new construction. There may be differing timeframes. For example, if you're putting a generator, they may want you to do it quicker than that. But this is real, so get the application in if you have any inkling that you might be relying upon natural gas. So, we talked about this a little bit. Considerations if a natural gas connection is denied, alternative energy sources, interruptible service, oil tank, liquid natural gas, propane, electric heat pumps, or geothermal. There are other alternatives that are out there. And again, I think the interruptible service would probably be the one that larger multifamilies would go to.
Nick, did you mention at the last session that if you fail to take their call and to switch over?
On the interruptible service,
that
yes.
you have to pay a
9
exorbitant
times.
rate?
Yes, 9 times. I think I mentioned this before about the interruptible service. If you fail to disconnect your interruptible service from natural gas, 9 times the penalty of the
Highest
natural
tariff.
gas highest tariff in effect. Yes. Depending upon the project scope and locations, you might need a site plan amendment. So for example, if you're going to use oil tanks or outside oil tanks, you may need site plan amendment. If you're reducing a number of units in a building that would, or do other changes to the building, you might need site plan amendment. may require amended secret review if it's a larger project, all things that need to be discussed. So let's talk a little bit. We're fortunate in one respect that we do have some experience with the natural gas moratorium in New York State. So in the town and village of Lansing, about 7,000 residents outside Ithaca, February 2017, NYSEG, New York State Electric and Gas, imposed a natural gas moratorium. Same reason. It was due to the lack of capacity for the pipelines to supply the natural gas. Moratorium still in effect today, 2 years later. No end in sight, by the way. So what were some of the impacts? The village had a medical facility. There was a proposed expansion. They were in the middle of their land use approvals. Moratorium came in. They would have created 100 jobs. The company couldn't do the expansion because it was just too expensive, because they were doing it to an existing facility. So what did they do? They took away 200 jobs. They took away the 100 they couldn't create and the 100 existing there because they needed to expand. And they found Ohio was a place there they could do the expansion. So 200 jobs lost. Now, Westchester County executive is very concerned that this is going to have, a moratorium is going to have a numbing effect on the economic development and redevelopment. Think about the office parks along Westchester Avenue in White Plains being converted to a supermarket, a Lifetime gym, and residential uses. Well, what's going to happen now? Again, I think there are alternatives, but the example of the 70,000 square foot residential in White Plains who canceled the contract, the uncertainty is what's scaring people and will say, I'm not going to put my money at risk. So there will be impacts, hopefully, because of Lansing, and hopefully getting the word out there, we'll be better prepared so that people will still be prepared to invest in the community.
Have you heard any fallout from lenders, yourselves?
I have not yet, no. I have not, but I'll be speaking to some commercial real estate brokers on Thursday morning. I expect I'll get some good stories there. I'll report back. Another example, the highway garage was connected to natural gas, and they had to put in an emergency generator. They could not connect it to natural gas, so, small example, but they spent $2,500 in additional cost for oil generator, oil tank. Con Edison has an exception, so you can use an emergency generator. Lansing did not. I suspect Con Edison looked at that and said, that's not a good example. Let's make an exception. So the biggest contradiction, Lansing has a Cayuga power plant, and they were planning to go from coal, get rid of the dirty fossil fuel, to natural gas to create the electricity. Because they can't run the pipeline there, they're still burning coal. And they're going to continue to burn coal because they need the electricity. Moratorium, no new pipeline. It was a small group of residents who wouldn't allow the pipeline to go across their property. And they prevented the new pipeline from being there. And again, it's also against the state's climate goal, and it's also against the recognition of climate change that we shouldn't be using natural gas. But the reality here is we're encouraging more fossil fuel burning. We spoke to the village planner, some elected officials, the building inspector, some local real estate brokers in Lansing, and a couple of them told us, since the moratorium, no new proposed restaurants due to the inability to connect to natural gas. Restaurants are a big user of natural gas for the heating. No new restaurants in the town or village of Lansing.
It's probably hard to quantify. I'm wondering if, the net gain, net loss between the environmental impacts, financial impacts.
Right.
There's so many inquiries to be made, and it's immeasurable. And
Right.
You can't balance it all out.
No, but there are impacts, and I think the problem is the suddenness of it, the lack of preparation, which is a problem. I don't think anyone says it's not good to have a goal of reducing reliance on fossil fuels. It's about how you get there and how you warn people.
But it's one thing, I think, when it's on a large scale, but the town of Lansing, if you're keeping a coal-fired plant
Yes.
and losing 200 jobs and gaining some more efficiency, where's the balance come into play?
Yeah, no, and I think that's the argument there. But remember, that area was also the center of the fracking battle, the anti-fracking battle. So there's also a lot of support for the moratorium in Lansing. There are people who are against it, but there's also a lot of support for it.
Nick,
And
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My understanding of the Lansing problem is that they actually had real low-pressure situations, and whereas here, seems still an element of this is not a physical capacity constraint, because Con Ed still has the ability to meet new capacity with delivered services and sort of other kinds of contracts. It may get to that, and in fact, I think the New York, the state energy plan since 2009 said there was going to be a shortfall as of 2018.
Right.
They were a year off. But is there, I mean, are there still areas to push on this is not a physical constraint that Con Ed can still be pushed, or the public, you know, the utility commission can be pushed? To sort of maybe put in micro compressor stations or other things to increase capacity?
So at the PSC hearing, when I attended it in White Plains, those comments were raised certainly by the elected officials, who said, how real is this, and other alternatives similar to what you mentioned. And Con Edison's response was, that's why we're doing the inventory collection. And I think that's what the PSC is going to focus on also. Once March 15th, tally up how many potential new customers you have, what's the demand, and then see what those solutions
I'm
are.
not saying count on it,
Yeah.
because chances are, I mean, I think there's no surprise, they've been predicting this for quite a long time. To me, it's not new news, but.
Yeah, I think it's being predicted, it's being mentioned, but it's not being publicized.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
the issue I have with it. So a school district had the low pressure issue that you've
Yeah.
mentioned, and they're now looking at geothermal, because the natural gas is not coming to them, so we're looking at geothermal heating. Single-family homes have installed propane tanks at higher cost and still require delivery by truck, which has environmental impacts, because now you're getting a number of trucks that are coming there. Multifamily residential developments required to install heat pumps at higher cost, so the real estate brokers were telling us that the cost to operate these units are now more expensive. It's a barrier to the lowest of levels of, the affordable housing, the lower rent. It has caused rents to raise. The concern here in Westchester is that it will have an impact on affordability, both with respect to, we've seen a lot of affordable housing being built, partially because of the, whenever you build, it's a 10% requirement, so when you do new construction, it's affordable. But if you don't have construction, then you're not having affordable housing being built. The last bullet point is the interesting one, that when I spoke to the PSC, I said we need to be mindful of. So in Lansing, they're now concerned that their electrical infrastructure is not sufficient to handle all the new electrical needs. And that's a comment I made, that Con Edison should be required to look at what the electrical demand will be, and are we going to have an electrical moratorium in a couple of years. So we need to get ahead of this and be thinking smart about it, and hopefully have a smarter solution. And so that is a concern up in Lansing, that their electrical infrastructure is not prepared and able to handle the extra demand. And with Indian Point going down, and it's a real concern for us.
I was just gonna, Nick, real quick,
Yep.
the prior slide, I mean, if Lansing had some of the safeguards that this moratorium does, and I don't want to sound like I'm defending the moratorium, but, for example, that project with the hospital,
Yes.
they could have submitted their plans, right, by March 15th, and that hospital expansion still would have went through. With the thing with the restaurants, you could have had another restaurant come in within 2 years.
Right.
I'm just saying, some of the, maybe they learned some lessons from Lansing, and they're trying to incorporate it here.
No, I think
I'm not
that's-
defending it, I'm just saying it's
I think that's true. I think there are some adjustments that had to be made to this moratorium that Lansing didn't have the benefit of. The gas generators is the clearest example to me.
But to that point, I mean, that's why it's incumbent upon the county and on us as a municipality to make sure we're getting the word out. to the
Yeah, absolutely. But we have it in the
to our
planning
approval
department.
processes and- Yeah,
We have notices in the planning department, and
yep.
we have everybody here, but we're doing it, it's been short notice. What is this, January 18th, this all was hit,
Right.
no, January 27th, what was it?
Yeah, January 18th. they
January
announced it.
18th, right.
Yep. Yeah, they give it about 2 months. So what's being done to address the Lansing moratorium? NICEAG continues to propose non-pipeline solutions, compressor pump station to address supply during the cold weather, RFP for other sources, a virtual pipeline, which is the trucking in natural gas. They're called ticking time bombs. But none of these alternative solutions will result in removal of the moratorium, because again, the existing natural gas customers aren't going to switch. If I'm on the natural gas, I'm not going to get off so someone else can get on unless you go out of business. So they've not seen any relief to their moratorium, and the only relief to the moratorium is one of two things: less demand or more supply.
Did they ever sue? Or
They did not. We spoke to the the elected officials, and members talk about suing NICEAG, but nothing has come of it that we've seen. And the reality is, I was asked that question in one of our seminars, how about if a group of us got together and sued Con Ed? At the end of the day, you're going to spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and it's not going to delay March 15th. The PSC ultimately was the one that has to take some action here. And what the county executive, Mr. Latimer, has urged is that March 15th date is unrealistic. You gave people 2 months. It should be pushed back. His suggestion was push it back to August 1st. Why August 1st? Because on July 1st, the PSC is supposed to come out with a report on the study of the moratorium and what led up to it and is it real and all the rest. county executive said, if you're gonna have a moratorium and it's necessary, give people more time and make it to August 1st. And so that's not being acted upon yet, to my knowledge. March 15th is still the date.
Well, something that's fresh in my head. Thinking down the road where we would not, at least I don't think we'd want, a 70,000 square foot storage container for
Liquefied natural gas, yeah.
Is there a means by which municipality, ours and others, if they're interested as well, could identify land where that could potentially be housed in advance, take zoning precautions to prevent that from coming to us? Or is that not something that we would be able to do with in terms of our legal, in the bounds of the law?
We can amend our vape law.
Right.
So, yes, no vape.
Vape shops, the 70,000 square, no marijuana dispensaries.
But is there something that can be done to prevent that? Because I don't know what size plot land that would require, and is it available in our municipality? And if it is, how do we take the steps to at least identify that in advance? Because no one's gonna want that. I think the majority of people would not want that type of time bomb or potential eyesore and trucks coming in and out with those materials.
I'm gonna hone up on my energy law and interaction with land use. But public utilities do have the rights of eminent domain. So they could acquire that property. It leads me to believe they probably have a right to do siting of it as well. So we need to make sure we're aware of that, and I think that's where the county needs to take the lead, is to meet with Con Edison and find out where these plants proposed. Maybe it's in good locations.
Then barring there being an issue with seeker, if they wanted to come to Newcastle, we'd be SOL?
I don't want to say that now. I want to look into it. I don't want to.
owns a fair amount of land in the town.
I was just
places
gonna say,
that are
Right, so we have to
potentially big enough.
Right, so I think we need to identify that and be in front of that.
We will get in front of that and get you some answers on that.
All right, thanks for, good night. Thank you. John, you're up.
So, takeaways, that's almost the last slide. Determine your gas demand ASAP, file your application ASAP no later than March 15th, get confirmation of submission of your application, make sure you can establish it was done. If you're before a land use board, be prepared to answer questions regarding the energy usage. Consider the dual source, that interruptible service we discussed. Number 6, consider if your site plan needs to be modified, confirm the energy source before signing the lease. Moratorium's here to stay, non-pipeline solutions are needed, and then let's keep taking a look at Lansing and seeing what solutions are out there. So that's it, the moratorium's here. There are solutions. We're going to work with NYSERDA and come back to the board with what some of those solutions are, especially in the single-family home, and we'll also address the zoning issues for public utilities. But that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for being such a joy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bravo. This would have been much more apt if it were on like Halloween.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary.
Yeah, yes.
Because I see potential for dislocation of population. If you lose 100 jobs in Lansing, you're going to lose 300 families.
Yeah, right, it's a ripple effect.
Yeah, it's 2.5 or 3, depends on what the multiplier is. That creates other problems, and that town is going to have lots of trouble, I would suggest. And, if the moratorium is here, then new buildings in areas that we have gas are going to have a different outcome over new buildings in areas that have to use fossil fuels. Like oil, number 2, oil.
Right.
Well, but that's not forever. That's going to be banned at some point too, probably. And so now you have to have some paperwork, I would think, when you sell a house that, oh, here's all this stuff that's going to happen to you, and good luck with property values. So I see lots of issues that could potentially come out of this if they don't do it very well.
Right. I think there are certainly lots of issues. There are solutions out there. I think we just need to press for them and publicize them and get them out there. Heat pumps, geothermal. Geothermal is not going to work better for a single-family home if you have enough land on it. It's not going to work on the smaller lots, I don't believe. But we need to start educating people what those alternative energy sources are.
Yeah, it's tricky where you have a septic system too, and
right.
But you don't drink that water; it just recirculates. One of the things. But
Okay. For my stomach a little bit.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody
town
questions? I
board,
think everybody has questions already, but
Yeah.
any questions?
No?
Hey, come on up.
Couple of comments.
I'm gonna sit down for a moment.
Oh, good. Bill Spade, local architect. My partner Keiko's here with me.
Want to give you a telephone number, a website?
Yeah, fine. You're right. I have plenty of cards.
I know your guess.
That's right. So I want to say, make the point that we are building houses and structures now without fossil fuels. The technology is there. There's no difference in the outcome of a non-fossil fuel building than in a fossil fuel building. They look the same. So, and we're doing that now. So I think what's interesting to me is if we're in this box and we're looking at the walls and saying, oh, you know, natural gas is going away or it's being threatened, what do? We're in a fear mode where let's get out of that box and say, all right, there's plenty of alternatives in terms of ways to heat and power buildings that are not fossil fuels at all. And we're doing them now. We are, in this town, you're building 2 affordable housing projects that are non-fossil fuel projects. The Habitat, now Fuller Center projects on 300 King Street and over in Millwood, those are passive house projects, and there's not going to be any fossil fuel usage in those buildings. The key is, and with the heating plant of any building, the key is what's the enclosure? What's the roof and what are the walls and what are the windows? We need all the heat and cooling that we use because we're losing it through the walls, right? And obviously, therefore, if you better insulate the walls, build a better structure, you're not going to lose that heating and cooling. You're going to be able to use smaller heating plants. And that's really the key to this kind of construction is increasing the insulation, increasing the quality of the materials that you use, and you need less energy to heat and cool it. I think of, all right, I live in a house that was built in 1917. It had 2x4 exterior walls and no insulation in the walls. It was plaster on the inside and wood siding on the outside. Had probably an oil-fired boiler, or maybe even coal back in those days, right? So that was the technology when that house was built. Now has 2x6 walls because we added that and improved the insulation. But our value right now with 6-inch walls is about a 19, and that's code. The projects we're doing for Fuller Center, the Habitat projects, we're getting R55 in the exterior walls and the roof. And we're going to be able to reduce the energy use of those buildings by 3/4. So, you know, we only need 1/4 the size of the plant. Therefore, we're using these buildings now use these air source heat pump type heating systems. They're you see them, we don't have them here, you see them in other places now. There's the wall mounted unit, top of the wall, they have floor mounted ones. These are, totally electric air source heat pumps, they're called. The knock on them in the past has been something that they're less efficient, less capacity in very cold weather. The manufacturers are solving that. We're in fact using Dakin as one of the manufacturers of those kinds of units. So, and those are perfectly appropriate for houses, for multifamily buildings, for commercial buildings. I'll also add, we're now doing the building at the top of the hill, 91 Bedford Road. We are using the air source heat pump mechanical units in those residential units, and there's no fossil fuels being used for the residential units there at all, as well as the commercial floor. The only thing we may need fossil fuel for, we will, is a cafe, hopefully, that we do in the ground floor, and for cooking for a restaurant, you need that kind of fossil fuel heat, right?
Could that be scaled up to the extent of, for example, the example Nick gave in White Plains?
Sure. There is on, the new technology campus Cornell's doing on Roosevelt Island, right? A 20-story, I don't know how many units, dormitory for that new campus is done in a passive house, as a passive house building. And it meets these same standards I was talking about, using these same kinds of electric-powered air source heat pump units.
And is the dollar cost upfront the same or comparable, or is it more expensive upfront with the saving on the back?
Yeah, the standard at the moment is to say that a passive house kind of building is about 10% more costly upfront than, comparable code compliant new building today. But if you're using 1/4 of the energy, it doesn't take much to know that in the very near term, you're going to have recaptured that 10% investment. So at the end, I would say we have the ability to build this way now and, don't even be bothered by a moratorium on anything about fossil fuels or, replacing that. We have the ability in our town to up the standards, people can build this way if they're led to that conclusion, right? I'm sure many of my clients would rather build with 2x4 walls and R13 insulation the way they used to, because that's going to be a little less costly. But we're in an environment now where we need to invest in how we build if we're going to solve this. The natural gas problem isn't our biggest problem, obviously. Our biggest problem is climate change and what are the effects of the CO2 or the CO contribution to the environment. Fossil fuel burning equipment is doing that. And unless we figure out ways to eliminate that and go to other alternatives, and we're going to have a far worse problem than whether we have enough natural gas in our community. So high-rise buildings, multifamily buildings, single-family buildings, commercial buildings can all be built with no fossil fuel equipment in them. And I'd encourage our town to think about how can the town be involved in encouraging that for construction. There's already good standards at the moment in terms of some certain projects have to meet LEED standards, and the energy code has gotten better, but we could step beyond that and lead the way to even higher standards for energy codes, and it's the technology is there to build that way.
So, Bill, if you have any examples of towns that have good energy codes, it might be worth
Sure.
sharing with us.
Okay, yeah. I know in Europe, I know which town in Belgium, what's the capital? Brussels. I believe Brussels adopted the passive house standard as its new energy code in terms of construction, and they're, certainly Europe is leading the way in terms of these efforts to really strengthen and go far forward in energy code use. Keiko, did you want to add anything else? Keiko's got a wonderful passion for this kind of construction and.
Well, it's not only passive house, Keiko Spade, partner. I was always.
We're like.
I'm always interested in recycling as well as incinerator that can be creating energy and preventing or the whole system that's also can be community emergency shelter, providing water, all those kind of things that can be in a one unit of building. I know we don't necessarily have that right now yet in the U.S., but I know it's other countries has been developing that. And so community-centered educational part as well as, 7 different benefit, regenerating energy, electricity, as well as reusing, recycling, making a product that can be used into road or civil use, and then also when all the extract of the gas can be cleaned out of pollutants, so that it's anything that exhaust is benign item, and then also in time of emergency trauma, like earthquake. Well, we don't have much earthquake here, but typhoon, hurricane, whatever. occurs, and those then, they have their own self-generator that can then support the local community as well, instead of each individual one little houses having that, creating more noise pollution and all that. So it would be good to look at whole community sort of support, so they can be energy source for whole community as well, and then able to burn all those waste instead of dumping someplace else, creating more issues as a long term. So, you know, I like to propose that. We have some presentation coming March 3rd, that we do have this scientist that created that in Japan that I would love to share, so if you're interested.
Please. What do you mean?
I will be in a Scandinavia house in Manhattan on Sunday from 1 o'clock, so, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just add, we would love to have you all visit the, I keep referring to it Habitat, because everybody knows that, it's Fuller Center now. On the 300 King Street project, they're making great progress with that construction. At a certain point soon, we're going to have the windows there to install. The windows are triple pane windows that, you know, a typical window has an R3 value. These have an R11. And so a triple pane passive house window, you know, is almost like an old exterior wall in terms of its insulation value. So I'll make sure to let everybody know we're going to have a particular public event for that, so you can see how that construction is being done.
It's a great idea. You can have like a tour and point out the features of the house. That,
Correct. Yeah.
Passive house.
Right. So, you know, we're out in front. There's not a lot of communities around that have the passive house kind of construction going on, and we're very happy that Habitat embraced that. All right.
Thank you.
Finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A couple of thoughts that, you know, if we, people that move here, you know, understand everything is high priced. So if the, you know, the capital cost is only 10% and the equation works out well that you get your money back, then if we had a leading kind of energy program when we build new buildings, commercial or residential, then we can advertise it in the short term,
Right.
and say, come here, we have it solved.
It's also consistent with sort of the brand, which is, we already are somewhat of a green community. We have a great sustainability advisory board. We've been very out front with those issues, and this is just another way to do that.
Yeah, and maybe we could even trade things. Like if we could cut gas use, can we trade that or sell it somewhere else, you know, half of it, but give up half and sell half?
So, but I asked kind of as in that question, right?
It
If you
did,
had
good for you.
a commercial building in northern Westchester that you went on to solar, could you then sell your natural gas credit to southern Westchester? And the answer was no.
No. Strong message to follow, yes.
But ultimately, won't that be determined by the PSC? I mean, they're telling us now this is what
Right,
they
I
want.
I would hope the PSC would come up with regulations
Right,
that would
okay.
allow or encourage that, yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe we should propose it too, even if we say it's within our own community, can we do trading?
Take a note on that, thank you.
And maybe it's not for new buildings, but it's for existing buildings, because again, you want to be consistent with the climate change goals.
What about leaf blowers?
Gross. Yeah. Well, I don't think we can, you know, on old buildings, it's tougher, of course, but it can be done. New buildings with 2x6s have another advantage too, they sustain high winds better. You know, so that, if we have hurricanes, that's good.
Right.
We need better armoring on the top for the trees that come down, though. That's the only thing left there. But there's a lot of interesting ideas that for our size community, we could make stuff happen, and if we can figure out how to trade, sell, or whatever through the PSC, then we may be able to induce more commercial into the community, change the whole tax, you know, system, you know, and make it better.
Yeah,
More
what's it-
complicated, but better.
What I think may be a complicating factor is that if a municipality adopted a stricter energy code than what New York State, you may be preempted and prevented from doing that. So we need to look into that, and that may be something the PSC should be looking into as well. If New York State has its own energy code or building code, for us to then come up with something more stringent, we would need permission from New York State.
Could you do
Like a
something,
home rule type issue?
Yes.
Home rule?
Yeah.
Yes.
could you do like something where
wouldn't
you're
they grant that?
encouraged to do it, and
I think
if
you're.
you could,
allowed-
the process is
You're allowed
streamlined
to
or something like
impose
that?
higher standards.
Yes,
I-
Hastings
I-
has it.
The energy, the building
Has a green
codes are
code.
the minimum.
Okay, I'm gonna check it.
Energy
So you
code
can
is,
check it out.
is established as the minimum standard. A community can require a higher standard.
Well, we've had issues with another municipality where they wanted to require fire sprinklers in all the buildings, and that was told you have to go and get a special exemption from
Right,
the
right,
Department of State to do that.
Right, right.
Really? Greenberg did that years ago.
And they got permission to do so,
I
yeah.
didn't realize that.
But I think on the energy code basis, you can certainly
Surpass
go
it,
above
yeah.
and beyond.
Well, let's look into it.
Yes, absolutely. All right.
So the town board actually has a continuation of their work session. We'll move to item number 2.
So the planning board, that was a hint.
Is that a hint?
A hint that they're very happy to receive.
We got 4 hours of CE, we're all set.
Right, exactly. You guys are still here as far as we're concerned.
Looks like an hour and a half.
Sign out for us, will you?
Right, right, right.